Good afternoon, and thank you to our alumni, donors, and friends of UMD for tuning in to our final session of virtual homecoming, Bulldogs Behind the Scenes, featuring the history of UMD building names. Well, my name is Molly Clevin, and I'm from the University of Minnesota Duluth Alumni Relations Team, and we are excited to conclude our homecoming virtual behind the scenes series, where we take an inside look at a variety of industry leaders. This week, we would have been gathered for in-person events celebrating UMD's homecoming. However, we're happy to continue the celebration remotely with a special behind-the-scenes session. Today, we have the honor of hearing from Jeni Eltink. Jeni serves as the director of the Kirby Student Center, UMD's home for student activities and events. She came to the University of Minnesota Duluth in 2004 with intentions to stay only for a few years. But the uniqueness of the campus and community has happily kept her here for 16 years and counting. Previous to her current position, Jeni held roles at UMD as the Director of First Year Experience and Students in Transition and as Assistant Director of First Year Experience. She loves learning about institutional history and bringing history to life for current students. I will now hand it over to Jeni to walk us through this fascinating history.
Molly, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who are joining us today from near and far. As Molly said, my name is Jeni Eltink, and as the director of the Kirby Student Center, it may seem a kind of strange person for me to be giving this presentation. The rationale behind it teaches us a little bit about the dangers of volunteering. And by that, I mean, a few years ago at UMD, because I'm a curious person, somebody was asking for suggestions for presentations that would be interesting for folks. And I said, somebody should really do a presentation on the history of building names at UMD. Who was Kirby? Who was Bohannon? And as you know, when you say somebody should do something, oftentimes that somebody is you. And so I joke about, quote, the dangers of volunteering, but really this has turned into kind of a passion project for me. And I really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to join me today so that we can talk about UMD's history, who all these buildings are named for, and kind of where we've been and where we're going next. We're going to be focusing our talk today on what we think of as the current UMD campus, what was originally known as Upper Campus when the University of Minnesota Duluth Branch first came into existence. It started with two buildings in a former farm field. These two buildings, you can see where we went from that to this, which is our current campus as it looks today. We can see that the buildings here from on this campus include those two original buildings from that farm field. What is now the Heller Hall, formerly known as just the Sciences Building, and the Sports and Health Center, the former Physical Education Building. Well, the answer to how did we get here lies with 125 years of history and with three people in particular. Here we see Regent Richard Griggs and Provost Raymond Darland with an extremely cool, gigantic 3D map of the University of Minnesota Duluth campus. How cool would it be to have something like this in my office today? And so Regent Griggs and Provost Darland were two of the three titans of building projects at UMD. Between the two of them, they were responsible for putting up more than 24 buildings on what is now the UMD campus. But their third person is the modern day advocate of campus building projects, Chancellor Catherine Martin. She's shown here at center right with the opening of what is now the Solon Campus Center. But although Regent Griggs, Provost Darland, and Chancellor Martin were really the titans of UMD building expansions, there are many, many others who helped UMD become the really great place it is today. So let's get started meeting them. We'll start out today with presidents, provosts, chancellors, and other administration guys, plus our one gal, Chancellor Catherine Martin. So if we go all the way back to 1901, we're going to meet E.W. Bohannon. He was president of the Duluth State Teachers College, which was the predecessor to University of Minnesota Duluth. And after the Duluth Normal School, the teacher training school, became the Duluth State Teachers College in 1901, E.W. Bohannon became the president. He continued in the position for 37 years. He's really the person responsible for what we now think of as lower campus, Washburn Hall, Torrance Hall, the laboratory school, where the Large Lakes Observatory is today. And because he was so focused on teacher training, Bohannon Hall, which is the home to the College of Education and Human Service Professions at UMD, is named in his honor. We also have the Darland Administration Building. So Ray Darland came to UMD in 1948, and he was one of a few people at UMD who worked in seemingly every role on campus. He started out as a professor, then was a department head, then a dean. In 1953, he became provost, the position that is analogous to our current position of chancellor. During his time as provost, his time in the lead, 27 buildings were added to Upper Campus. 27 buildings. And the building that was last erected during his time at UMD was later named for him. Darland Administration Building, or DADB, as it's known here at UMD, is home to the Chancellor's office, to a number of other administrative functions, and is a gateway to campus. Robert Heller came to UMDB as a professor of geology. He was another one, sort of like Ray Darland, who did so many different things. He was assistant provost, and then when UMD switched over, he became UMD's chancellor. He was chancellor from 1976 to 1987, was a huge fan of Bulldog hockey. And when Bulldog hockey team went to the Soviet Union in 1984, he accompanied the team. He's shown here in this photo looking at geological souvenirs with folks in the Soviet Union. Lawrence Ianni was a tireless advocate for UMD, the consummate Bulldog. It was a difficult time for UMD's history during the time that Chancellor Ianni was on campus. There was a desire to shrink the size of the UMD student body, but Chancellor Ianni worked tirelessly to advocate for UMD through budget cuts and was ultimately successful in getting permission for UMD to grow its enrollment, setting the stage for Catherine Martin's later building projects. Chancellor Ianni is shown here with Bill Clinton when he visited campus in the early 1990s. Catherine Martin was the first female chancellor in the University of Minnesota system. She was responsible for the erection of over a dozen new buildings at UMD, including the library, which was her passion and the building that now bears her name. Chancellor Martin served until 2010 before current Chancellor Ledley C. Black. Now we come to Regents of the University of Minnesota. Minnesota system is served by 12 regents, a number of whom are serving as regents at large, and others of whom represent different parts of the state of Minnesota. There's so many people who tirelessly have been bulldogs for our Bulldogs, and we'll meet some of them now and the buildings that honor their legacy. So Fred Chena started out as an attorney in central St. Louis County and was elected to the legislature in 1947. He was one of the people who was responsible for helping to bring what was the Duluth State Teachers College into the University of Minnesota system. And after he left the legislature, he served as a U of M regent representing Northeastern Minnesota. Chena Hall is home to a number of programs, including the American Indian Studies program, programs in sociology, criminology, and other liberal arts departments. Erwin Goldfein was a lifelong resident of Duluth. His family's business eventually became ZMC Hotels, which is a large hotel management company. His claim to fame for UMD was he was one of the early backers of having a branch of the medical school at the Duluth campus. He served on the U of M Board of Regents from 1975 to 1987, And now some of UMD's on-campus apartment buildings are named for him. Griggs Hall and Griggs Center are just some of the places on campus that honor Richard Griggs. He truly is a giant in UMD's history. He purchased and donated 160 acres of former farmland that comprise the current UMD campus, the quote unquote upper campus, assisted in fundraising for buildings, was a partner in crime to Provost Darland, and served as a regent for many, many years. He was the founder of Greyhound bus lines. In the picture here, he is shown with Regent Griggs, along with Provost Darland and the widow of Stephen Kirby. Griggs Hall is a largest residence hall on campus and is home to over 1,000 students. Gerald Heaney was a regent just for a short time before he stepped down because he was appointed as a judge in the US 8th District Court. But then he stayed in that position for 40 years. He was a strong advocate for the importance of UMD as part of the University of Minnesota system and for Northeastern Minnesota in higher education. Heaney Hall is also on-campus living and serves students who live on campus in apartments at UMD. William Montague was an attorney, Assistant Attorney General of Minnesota, and a longtime fan of Shakespeare. He's shown here in this photo in the center between Regent Griggs and Regent Tina. William Montague is known for many things, including publishing research on the real Shakespeare controversy. Was Shakespeare actually Shakespeare, or was Shakespeare Christopher Marlowe and other folks out there? And so Montague Hall is home to programs in the College of Education and Human Service Professions. So sometimes people just were interested in backing UMD. Sometimes people just worked at UMD. Folks sometimes think that you have to be a major donor, or you have to be somebody important in campus administration or in system administration in order to have a building named for you. But there are so many people who, like me, came to UMD for a little bit, stayed for a long time, and really became part of the fabric of campus. Let's meet some of those folks. Adolph Benoni Anderson was a state legislator from Duluth who really was the driving force behind Duluth State Teachers College becoming part of the University of Minnesota. In the 1947 legislative session, that was made a reality, and University of Minnesota, Duluth Branch was born on July 1st, 1947. The family of Dr. William Bagley purchased land adjacent to the upper campus for the use of UMDB. Combined with land that was donated by the city of Duluth and by St. Louis County, it forms today what is known as Bagley Nature Area, over 80 acres of beautiful pond, forest, trails, spectacular views. Dr. Bagley was an avid outdoorsman and wanted what is now UMD to have a unique outdoor recreation area right in the middle of the beautiful city. And of course, one close to my heart, Kirby Student Center and Kirby Plaza. Stephen Kirby was a friend of Regent Richard Griggs, but other than that, he had no connection to UMD. But when the campus decided that they really needed to have a student center on campus, Regent Griggs convinced Stephen Kirby to fund a third of the project. The Kirby Student Center was built at the same time as the first two residence halls on campus, Vermillion Hall and Burnside Hall. And unfortunately, Mr. Kirby died during the building's construction. And the Regents of the University of Minnesota decided to honor him by naming the building for him in 1956. And after what was the old UMD library was renovated for use, the building next door to Kirby Student Center became Kirby Plaza in 2004. So when you come into campus from Woodland Avenue onto College Street, you really can't miss the gigantic building with the tall smokestacks right next to the sort of main parking lot on campus. A lot of people say, oh yeah, that building, which you didn't know had a name, is actually named for Roy Lund. He was a supervising engineer and assistant vice president of the University of Minnesota, but he was really an advocate for the physical facilities of campus. And so there are a number of facilities management functions, both office functions and heating and chilling and other interesting and fascinating things that happen in the Lund building, which I was fortunate enough to get a behind the scenes tour of my own just a few years ago. And we all know the legacy of James S. Molosky, Mo Molosky at UMD. He coached UMD Bulldog football for 40 years and really is one of those people whose name is most associated with UMD. So while the field within the stadium is named for Regent Griggs Field, the stadium complex itself honors UMD's most legendary athletic coach. This is a building that many people who attend UMD and work at UMD don't even realize exists. While the Lund building is front and center and a lot of people don't know its name, a lot of people don't even know that the Bridges Fleet and Grounds building even exists on campus. It's tucked between Woodland Avenue and Molosky Stadium. And so if you've ever paused to wonder or are wondering now, what happens to all of the machinery, all of the snow plows, all of the everything, when that stuff's not in use? Well, it lives in the Bridges Fleet and Ground building. He was a vice provost of business affairs at UMD, but Bob Bridges was the head of UMD Plant Services, now known as Facilities Management, for many years. He's shown center in this photo at one of the groundbreakings of some of the many buildings that were put up during his time. Ralph Romano is beloved at UMD, and hopefully at least some of you had the opportunity yesterday to see the behind the scenes tour of Romano Gymnasium, or to see Monday's presentation with the marching band. And so in this photo here, you see the combination of all three, Romano Gym, marching band, and Ralph Romano. He was a UMD alum, was a 3-time varsity letterman as a hockey goalie, then went on to coach the hockey team and was the director of intercollegiate athletics. And he was key in the development of the women's athletics program. Romano Gym honors Ralph Romano's huge legacy at UMD. Alice and George Tweed donated their mansion at 1st Street at 23rd Avenue East to Duluth State Teachers College for use as the art department. So the Duluth State Teachers College was on what we now know as lower campus. Students in the art program traveled to 1st Street and 23rd Avenue East to be able to take their classes. The Tweeds later donated their own personal art collection and their family home to UMDB. But in 1958, a museum was built at the upper campus adjacent to the Humanities building, named for Alice Tweed Toohey. This is another one of those buildings that a lot of people see, a lot of people look at, and a lot of people don't know how to pronounce. A few years ago, I was curious enough to head over to what is now the Swenson College of Science and Engineering and actually ask myself, what is that building called? And the answer is Voss Kovac. Now, Voss and Kovac aren't one person, it's 2 different people, but both of them involved in industrial education and engineering. And that's why Voss Kovac Hall is home to some of UMD's biggest engineering departments on campus. Frank Kovac, was the head of industrial engineering, was the first athletic coach for the Duluth State Teachers College. And when Duluth State Teachers College became part of the University of Minnesota, Gordon Voss took over that department and served until 1967. After leaving his post at UMD, he was later an advocate for the campus in the Minnesota legislature. Ward Wells was recruited by Duluth State Teachers College President Ray Gibson to serve as the longtime head of the physical education program, first at Duluth State Teachers College, then at University of Minnesota Duluth Branch, and then, as we know it today, UMD. He was a community advocate for physical education as part of a well-rounded education, not just in K-12, but also for higher education. And so the field house, which was recently renovated within the past few years, is named to honor him. This picture shows his wife and his sons at the dedication of the Ward Wells Field House. Sometimes we do have alumni and folks who are connected to UMD who make the gifts that make it possible for us to have the spectacular buildings we have on campus today. Sometimes they're alumni, sometimes they're connected in other ways, but we appreciate the generosity of these folks who help make these buildings happen. Our newest building on campus is the Heikela Chemistry and Advanced Materials Science Building, or HCAMS. Kurt Heikela earned a master's degree in chemistry from UMD in 1979. Along with his wife, Beth, he founded the Tundra Companies, and they've worked especially with UMD faculty member Robert Carlson in the development of new particle polymer materials and new products. Bob Carlson is the head of the Advanced Material Science program, and we thank the Heikelas for making that building. The Swenson in Swenson Science Building, Swenson Civil Engineering Building, and the Swenson College of Science and Engineering is James Swenson. He's a UMD alum, class of 1959. He was the founder of Details Incorporated, and for many years gave an opening convocation for students in the College of Science and Engineering as new first-year students arrived on campus. Jim passed away within the past few years and will be sorely missed at UMD. Joel Leibovitz is one of the founders of Maurice's, which is, of course, an iconic Duluth company. He's also chairman of Leibovitz Enterprises, which manages Duluth hotels in Duluth and across the country. He and his wife, Sharon, pictured here, helped fund the first LEED Gold certified building in the University of Minnesota system. LEED Gold certification is a sustainability certification, and the Leibovitz School of Business and Economics is stunning both architecturally and in terms of its sustainable footprint on campus. Three of the Marshall sisters, Caroline, Julia, and Jessica, were longtime patrons of the arts in Duluth, along with Marjorie Congdon Dudley, who was one of the Congdon children of Glenn Sheen fame. The three sisters decided that the University of Minnesota Duluth needed a performing arts center on the UMD campus. They're shown here at the dedication of the Marshall Performing Arts Center, and Marjorie Congdon Dudley is honored with the Dudley Experimental Theater for her contribution. Duluth native Marshall W. Allworth joined his father, Marshall H. Allworth, in the family's real estate and other businesses. He had a passion for astronomy and funded the entire construction of the UMD Planetarium, the MWAH Planetarium, the adjacent building, which is home to the physics department, including astronomy, electrical engineering, and other science-related disciplines, is also named in his honor. Sam Solon was a longtime Minnesota legislator and is pictured here on the left in the photo. The Solon Campus Center was built and opened in 1995 and is the home not only to the mathematics department, but to the admissions office, career and internship services, and lots of other support services for students. It was built adjacent to the Kirby Student Center on what used to be the front lawn of Kirby. And now the roof of the Solon Campus Center serves as the Kirby Terrace, an outdoor recreation and gathering space for students at UMD. The wedge is perhaps the most famous part of the Solon Campus Center. You can see it in the photo there on the bottom, a huge pie-shaped triangular skylight that lets people experience the beauty of Duluth's weather in cold seasons and warm. The tale of Sophie Dufresne Concourse is an interesting one. James Dufresne was never able to attend college. He was a resident of Duluth and couldn't afford to go to college because he was supporting his widowed mother and his other brothers and sisters. He made a bequest in 1933 to fund a scholarship for students like him, students who were supporting widowed or widower parents and were supporting younger siblings. It was not a very common thing, and so after struggling for many years to find deserving recipients who met that scholarship criteria, his bequest for that scholarship fund was used to fund the concourse that connects the residence halls to Kirby Student Center and to Superior Dining, the residential hall on campus. Sophie Dufresne Concourse is one of the places that many folks go through on a daily basis, but very few people know the story of James Dufresne and his mother, Sophie. Then, of course, one of UMD's most architecturally famous buildings is Weber Music Hall, designed by architect Caesar Pelli and partially funded by a gift from Ron and Marianne Weber. This Weber Music Hall replaced Concourse B, which was the connection between the Humanities Building and the Sports and Health Center. Both Ron and Marianne Weber are UMD alum, and Ron was one of the first to introduce some of the most famous fishing lures to the United States. They're pictured here, Ron and Marianne Weber, along with our current chancellor, Lindley C. Black. Now, there are some buildings around campus that seem like they might be named for people, but they're not. So let's just very briefly go through what those buildings are and what they're actually named for. First is Burnside Hall. Along with Vermilion Hall, these two were the first on-campus residence halls. Burnside Hall is named for Burnside Lake, located approximately 3 miles from Ely at the edge of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. Burnside Lake's more famous cousin, of course, is Lake Vermilion, located again near Ely at the edge of the Boundary Waters. Fun fact, Lake Vermilion has 365 islands, or each of Vermilion Hall's 62 residents could visit about 6 different islands without having to repeat. Vermilion Hall is now home to the only men's only residence hall on campus. Burnside Hall is women only, and the remainder of the campus's residence halls and apartments have floors and apartments for both genders. So we have Chester Congdon. Would Chester Park be someone? No, Chester Park is named for the neighborhood, not Mr. Chester Park. The Duluth Public Schools facility, which you could see in that original photograph of the upper campus, was built in 1927, built at the edge of what at the time was farmland. It closed as part of the Duluth School Board's reorganization plan, and UMD purchased this building in 2006. It's home to the music department, to communication sciences and disorders, and some other departments, and is one of the few buildings at UMD not connected by concourses or skyways. Then we have the building now known as Ndazi Gikinu Amading. Originally the home of the School of Business and Economics, this is now the home of UMD's Education Department, and its name in the Ojibwe language means the place of teaching and learning together. It's often known on campus as Edu-E. And finally, Glen Sheen. Built as the home of Chester and Clara Congdon, Glen Sheen became part of UMD in 1968, but the house wasn't opened until 1979 for tours and public functions. It is now the most popular house museum in the Midwest. Lots of great and interesting things happening at UMD, and also provides an opportunity for students in the Museum Studies program to both assist Glen Sheen and to further their study. So here we are, UMD's campus. Now you know a little bit, and I also know a little bit. Chances are that you all know a lot more. And so we invite you not only to continue sharing in the chat as you have been, but to send us your thoughts, your memories, corrections of things I might have gotten wrong, or other things that we can add on to this presentation so that more people can know about the men and women behind what we now know and love as UMD. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeni, for that historical tour of campus. We are now going to transition to our question and answer portion of the webinar. Perfect. Well, as Jeni mentioned, this is the time for you to submit your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We did ask questions, however, ahead of time through our registration, and I will just start that off. The first question actually is looking for some clarification about what was the year that the Marshall Performing Arts Center was dedicated.
Oh, that is an excellent question that I will have the answer to in about 2 minutes. How's that?
Perfect. We'll come back to that then.
All right, thank you.
All right. Perhaps you'll know this one. Thinking of lower campus, do you know anything about who Torrance and Washburn were?
You know, that's been one of the things that we've been working on researching. As part of UMD's 125th anniversary, we're trying to get more information about the lower campus. Haven't been able to dig that out yet, but the archivists in the Catherine Martin Library at UMD are diligently working with me to go through some of those really old records. And our hope is that we're going to be able to add those really soon.
Wonderful. Uh, Another question about lower campus. Do you know what buildings are left?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the building that was most frequently known or most recently known as Old Main obviously burned. The arches are still there, and it's now part of the what is sort of known as Arches Park, as a Duluth park. But Washburn Hall and Torrance Hall are still there. They are have gone through a number of different things. UMD owned them for a while. They're now in the hands of private owners. There is also still what for a time was known as the laboratory school. And the Large Lakes Observatory has a presence down there. And so with the exception of Old Main and some original outbuildings, most of those buildings are still standing at lower campus. And you can go through and take a peek at it. It's right off Fifth Avenue East, or excuse me, off of 26th Avenue East at 5th Street. And I did get, Matt is my researcher extraordinaire here. The Marshall Performing Arts Center was dedicated in 1974.
Perfect. Another question, what will be the next building to be built at UMD?
The honest answer to that is we don't know. Our focus on campus right now in my conversations with the folks in facilities management, who are just an excellent resource and full of a ton of information, is that we're really focusing on preserving the buildings that we have. And so the great news that we got last week was that in the bonding bill that has been going through the legislature, there is money for the renovation of A.B. Anderson Hall, which is sort of the next on campus. What we think is probably going to be the next building is going to be something that is tentatively being called Zenith Food Hall. And that is will be another dining facility adjacent to the current Superior Dining, sort of formerly known as the Residence Dining Center. We desperately need more space on campus to be able to serve students who live on campus and the thousands of students who come to campus every day and the folks who work there. But in the current situation, we don't know exactly when that's going to start, but plans are being drawn up for that to start as soon as possible.
Wonderful. And also speaking of recent events, and perhaps this may be a question outside of your wheelhouse, Jeni, but what are the plans to rename the newly combined CLA and SFA colleges?
That is one outside of my wheelhouse. I do know that right now it's being called the College of Liberal Arts. I haven't been privy to any information that it might be something different, but there might be somebody out there right now on this webinar who might know more information about that than I do.
Wondering about the Venden and if it still exists, and perhaps you can provide some context around that.
It does. Oh, and I love the Venden space. So the Venden is the name for the sort of the space of the basement of Bohannon Hall, adjacent to Bohannon 90, which is one of the big lecture halls on campus. And for many, many years was the home to a truly astounding assortment of vending machines, hence Venden. Sort of lowish ceilings, very comfy. For many, many years, the aesthetic was orange and white tile on the floors and orange booths and chairs. It's always been a great study spot. And about 5 or 6 years ago, the Venden was renovated. They now have soft seating in their sort of comfy chairs, in addition to booths and high top tables. It still exists. It's still a place where students go, and still is one of my favorite places on campus. It is gorgeous and beautiful, but I will admit that I do miss the orange and white checkerboard tile.
For those that remember, in the chat box, feel free to type in your favorite memory of the Venden. I think we all have one. And I think we all have our own opinion about the flooring.
Probably.
Yeah. Another question here, wondering about an offsite location. Speaking of the UMD Farm, do you know if there's any buildings on that land on the farm?
There are a few buildings on the land at the UMD Farm, the UMD Land Lab, as it's technically called. They are not really buildings that are classroom buildings or instructional buildings, and not, as far as I know, buildings that have names, but mostly are dedicated to the running of the farm itself. And that farm is off of Jean Duluth Road. And there's just so many cool things that come out of there.
A question about your research process. How did you go about researching all of these buildings? And can you provide a little bit about that information about that?
So when I say that the folks in facilities management are a wealth of information and generous with their time, that is absolutely the core of this. I was so fortunate that there was a book that was published about 30 years ago that was well, I shouldn't say was published, was put together with the sort of plastic binding, photocopied from what was originally typewritten kind of project summaries for a lot of the different buildings at UMD. And John Kessler, who is one of the folks who's worked on a lot of building projects and renovation projects at UMD, was kind enough to loan me his copy of it, with the understanding that if I folded it, spindled it, mutilated it, he would fold, spindle, and mutilate me. And so we took very precious care of that. And that's where a lot of this started. So it's a really fascinating book. And then every time I ran across questions, I would call up the folks in FM, John and some of the other folks. There's also some great information out on the facilities management website that I use to sort of poke around. And so really it was just a matter of bugging the right people at UMD to get information that turned out to be super helpful.
Perfect. Question about the process for deciding on building names and naming rights, if you could touch on that a little bit.
Sure, just very briefly, and this is very much outside my wheelhouse. Building naming is not something that's done lightly. It is typically something where the campus administration is very involved, the system administration is very involved, and then ultimately it's a regent's decision to name a building. And so typically there's a proposal put forward for a recommended name for a building. And the alumni office is involved with that. The development office might be involved with that. But there's a lot of conversation that goes into deciding to put somebody's name on a building, because that's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so you had mentioned this briefly though, but if folks wanted to do their own research and dig a little deeper, what would you recommend?
There is so much wonderfully amazing information on the library website. One of the projects that's been going on for a couple of years is that the folks in the Catherine A. Martin Library archives have been putting a lot of old yearbooks online. Almost all of the yearbooks are online, have been digitizing resources left and right. And a lot of that is available out there. It takes some digging. If you are totally nerd-tacular like I am, and kind of want to know everything about everything, that is a really fun process. They also carry archives of what was the UMD Statesman and is now the UMD Bark. So that's another great place to go to, or even just sort of poking around on the website of facilities management will lead to some kind of cool and unexpected finds.
And just to add on about the yearbooks, actually in our office, Alumni Relations, we do have hard copies available as well for people to take a peek at as well. They're definitely fun to look through. So, and I think we're going to end on one more question. So you had talked about the Kirby Student Center and how that holds a special place in your heart. And recently, within the last couple of years, it's had a renovation. Would you like to talk a little bit about that and anything else about the Kirby student program that you'd like to plug?
We talk about Kirby Student Center as being at the heart of campus, or really it's at the physical center of campus. So sometimes we refer to it as the belly button of campus. It's really a UMD crossroads. We typically have about 9,000 trips a day through our building, and from time sort of immemorial in the history of UMD, there has always been so much going on in that building. So one of the things that's been really interesting for us as we, over the past few years, have renovated the first floor and then the second floor, is to look back and uncover sort of the building's history. So for example, a little more than a year ago, we did the ribbon cutting on the renovation of what's now the Multicultural Center on the second floor. What was the original dining facility when Upper Campus was being built? So folks who were on campus in the 50s and 60s, there was a ramp that went from the first floor of Kirby up to the second floor into the dining facility. And when we pulled back the carpet in the Multicultural Center, we found where the ramp had been and where that had all been concreted over, right? We're able to sort of find some old photographs. And in our first floor renovation, had a really fun time in 2013 of finding old 1950s and 1960s photographs of the Kirby Student Center and going to that same place and retaking photographs from that same perspective, usually with sort of current students standing in the same physical places as students were in those original photos. But one of the things that we know is that there is so much we don't know about the history of Kirby. And unfortunately, good records weren't always kept. And so I know that for so many alumni, whether it was attending Kirby Program Board or Late Night Kirby events, being involved in student clubs and student organizations, being part of fraternity and sorority life, there are so many memories that they have about UMD and about Kirby Student Center and their involvement there, hanging out in the old bullpub. The calendar that UMD published last year had this amazing photograph in there of a student sitting in the bullpub with a cup of coffee and a cigarette in his hand, and he was toasting a piece of bread over an open fire. Things that we just don't see anymore in Kirby. Still have the coffee, not so much the cigarettes and the open fire, but that really make us realize that there are a lot of memories out there. And so I would just love to hear from alumni and folks who've worked at UMD, especially what their memories are and were of Kirby. And so you can email us at kirby@d.umn.edu with your thoughts, your memories. I'd love to have conversations with people. about UMD in general, but most particularly about Kirby, because that is such an important place for so many people at UMD, and just as near and dear to my heart or to my belly button, depending on how we frame it.
Oh, well, it's on that note. Thank you so much, Jeni, for taking the time and sharing your insight on all of the history and the people that came before us for the campus. And I think we all learned a little something and are a little nostalgic today. So thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. This was our third and final behind the scenes for homecoming week. However, there are still opportunities for you to join the fun. We have live in class sessions where you can join live in a student class. So you can check our website for that. We've got a whole host of Bulldogs behind the scenes coming up here in the next couple of months as well. So keep an eye on that too. Once again, thank you and go Bulldogs.